And while Jordanian authorities evacuated hundreds of tourists from the ancient city of Petra after heavy rains caused flash floods, the evacuation and suspension of entry tickets to Petra came as precautionary measure to ensure the safety of the tourists here.
For 2,000 years, Al-Khazneh, the Treasury, Petra's most famous facade, was the most confidently mislabeled structure in the ancient world. Every scholar agreed on what it was. Every textbook repeated the same answer. Every tour guide stood in front of those towering columns and delivered the same story to millions of visitors.
But we think that this was probably the tomb of a Nabatean king, probably of King Aratas IV, who arguably was the greatest Nabatean king of them all.
In 2024, archaeologists proved all of it wrong. What they found when they finally broke through the seal changes not just what we know about the treasury, it changes what we thought we understood about the civilization that built it. The warnings. Long before any archaeologist set foot inside the SIQ, the narrow, winding canyon that leads into the heart of Petra, the Bedouin families who had lived around this city for centuries already knew the treasury was different. They didn't treat it the way tourists treat it today, as a backdrop, as a destination, as something beautiful and essentially safe. They feared it. And they passed that.
They moved away from the tourist area with their herd and feel quite isolated up here in the mountains.
Fear down through generations in the form of very specific, very practical rules. Don't approach Al-Khazneh casually. Don't let your children play near it after sunset. Don't sleep on the ground in front of it. Don't linger longer than you have to. These weren't legends told around a fire for entertainment. They were survival instructions. Enforced the way you'd enforce a rule about not drinking from a well you already knew was poisoned. The fear wasn't superstition. It was grounded in something observed, something experienced, something passed down because it was true and because ignoring it had consequences. No one outside the region wanted to hear that. No one outside the region was listening. These families had lived in and around the rock-cut city for generations. They built their homes in the carved chambers. They knew every passage, every sealed door, every structure the Nabateans had left behind. They were not confused about what the treasury was. They were very specifically afraid of it. There is a difference, and it matters. When 19th century European explorers arrived, several recorded the warnings in their journals, mostly as local color, mostly as evidence of how superstitious the indigenous population remained in the face of wonders they couldn't understand. Johann Ludwig Burckhardt, the first Westerner to formally document Petra in 1812, noted that his local guides refused to linger near the structure and became visibly uncomfortable when pressed to explain why. He wrote it down. He didn't take it seriously. Later, travelers reported something stranger. Men who camped near Al-Khazneh at night described hearing sounds beneath the ground. Low, rhythmic vibrations moving upward through the stone floor, felt as much as heard. Others noted sudden, sharp temperature drops near the facade, a distinctive metallic smell, like iron and wet stone pressed together in an enclosed space. Here's the catch. These reports came from travelers, across different decades, who had never read each other's journals. No shared source, no contact. And yet the descriptions are almost identical. The same sounds, the same smell, the same physical unease. The scientific community dismissed all of it for over a century, filed under folklore, under indigenous superstition, under things that are interesting but not evidential. Then something surfaced that was harder to dismiss. A Jordanian archaeological memo from the 1950s reportedly described the ground beneath the treasury's forecourt as structurally abnormal and critically not of natural formation. The document existed. Researchers saw it. Within a year of its circulation, it vanished from public records. No retraction, no correction, no acknowledgement it had ever been written, just gone. And for the next 7 decades, every attempt to find out what this structure was actually built for was blocked before it could begin. 70 years of locked doors. Between the 1960s and 2020, multiple independent research teams submitted formal proposals to study the subsurface beneath the Treasury's forecourt. Most were rejected outright. Some stalled indefinitely. A few never received any response at all. Jordan's Department of Antiquities gave the same official explanation every time: structural risk. The Treasury was fragile. Subsurface excavation endangered the facade. The precaution of a responsible government protecting its most irreplaceable heritage. On paper, that reasoning was sound. Behind closed doors, the language was very different.
The reason why this tomb endured and survived armies and earthquakes is that the Nabateans who built it cut it into the sandstone surface of the mountain.
Dr. Muhammad Najjar of Jordan's Department of Antiquities, one of the country's most respected and widely published field archaeologists, later noted that internal discussions focused far less on engineering risk and far more on what he called the problem of exposure. He sat with the files. He read what the officials actually wrote to each other, and he said the concern wasn't that excavation might crack the stone. It was that excavation might reveal something that couldn't be managed once it reached the open. Several internal documents reportedly warned that certain subsurface discoveries could trigger cultural and political instability, not damage, not loss. Instability. At least 3 rejected proposals referenced an unauthorized excavation from the 1930s whose field notes had vanished from institutional archives entirely. Someone dug, someone wrote it up, and then someone else made sure those records ceased to exist. But one document from that period survived in a private archive. Researchers who were permitted to examine it described the final page, a single handwritten instruction at the bottom, blunt and unelaborated. And get this. If you want to understand what this structure was actually built for, this one line is where the 70-year silence begins to make sense. If you want to see what they found when they finally broke through, hit subscribe, because what comes next rewrites everything. Do not disturb the lower chamber. It is not a tomb. The shape. That instruction stayed buried in a private archive while the world photographed the facade above it. Then, in 2024, the ability to hold the line ran out. Leaked satellite imaging revealed density anomalies directly beneath the forecourt. Straight lines, right angles, geometry that could only exist if human hands had made it. The images circulated through research institutions before anyone with authority to suppress them could intervene, and the pressure on Jordanian authorities to grant excavation access became impossible to resist. Permission came, but with conditions the archaeological community had never encountered in this form: reversible trenches only, millimeter-level documentation at every stage, real-time structural sensors monitoring stone stress throughout, and one final instruction delivered privately and verbally to the excavation leadership. This project is not treasure hunting. Do not treat what you find as heritage. Treat it as containment. That word hung over everything that followed. Dr. Sarah Parkak, the satellite archaeologist from the University of Alabama at Birmingham, had spent years studying the forecourt anomalies from orbit. She had helped push for the permit. She knew the data better than almost anyone. But ground-level scanning was different entirely. She stood over the readouts and didn't speak for a long moment before she said anything at all. The question she had carried for years, what this structure was actually built for, was about to get an answer none of her orbital data had prepared her for. 3 independent scanning technologies had been deployed simultaneously. Ground-penetrating radar, electrical resistivity tomography, and magnetometry. 3 separate systems, 3 separate data sets, each one run independently by separate teams before any comparison was made. Every single one returned the same result. Beneath the forecourt, there was a void, not a crack, not a natural cavity shaped by erosion, a rectangular space with clean straight edges, defined corners, and proportions matching Nabatean architectural forms, referenced in ancient inscriptions specifically in the context of restriction and containment. Not burial, not ceremony, containment. Dr. Sarah Khalil, a geoarchaeologist from the University of Jordan, assigned to lead the radar team, ran her sweeps 3 full times. The anomaly appeared identically on every pass. She called the dig director over. According to team accounts, neither of them spoke for nearly 30 seconds. The shape was too precise to be geological, too deliberate to be accidental, too deep to have formed on its own. But here's the deal. Several radar sweeps returned distorted signal behavior, as if something inside the sealed chamber was interfering with the equipment's resonance. Technicians recalibrated everything on site, reran the full sequence. The distortion was unchanged. It wasn't machine error. It wasn't interference from equipment above ground. The disruption was coming from inside the sealed space. Magnetic readings added another layer. The chamber showed residual heat signatures inconsistent with burial spaces. Tombs equalized to surrounding rock temperature over centuries. This one hadn't. The thermal data pointed to repeated high heat events occurring inside the chamber before its final closure. Not a single funeral pyre. Something deliberate. Something repeated. Internal sediment samples showed compression in curved formations, pushed outward from the center, consistent with bodies or large masses pressing against the chamber walls before the space was permanently sealed. Dr. Richard Jones, a structural archaeologist from the University of St. Andrews, reviewed the composite reconstruction and went quiet before he answered. The chamber was designed to allow entry. It was not designed to support exit. Whatever this structure was actually built for, he said, it was not intended to let people leave it, and that was before anyone had broken the seal. Steps cut for confinement. Physical excavation moved with agonizing slowness. Metal tools replaced with wooden instruments and soft brushes. Every layer documented before anything moved. Every surface photographed from 3 angles before the next centimeter of earth was cleared. The team understood they were moving toward an answer to a question that had been suppressed for 70 years. Whatever this structure was actually built for, they were about to find out whether the people who sealed that 1950s memo had a reason to be afraid of exactly this moment. The first thing to emerge was a set of narrow stone steps cut directly into the bedrock, descending at a steep and irregular angle. Dr. Kreeman noted immediately that the geometry was wrong for any funerary use. Burial stairways are built for repeated ceremonial access, wide enough for procession, angled gently for careful footing. These steps dropped sharply. Almost no stable footing on the descent. The angle and narrowness appeared deliberately designed to disorient anyone going down. They would have been significantly harder to climb back up. The flanking walls carried no carvings, no symbols, no inscriptions. But the stone blocks had been fitted in an interlocking pattern that structural analysis identified as reinforcement against outward force, pressure pushing from inside the chamber toward the outer walls. Not built to keep the cliff face from collapsing in, built to hold something in. Here's the catch. At arm height along multiple wall sections, shallow grooves and irregular scoring marks appeared in the stone, nothing matching any tool used during construction. Forensic stone analysis indicated they had been made by repeated contact with hands or with objects dragged along the wall with sustained force and irregular rhythm. The pattern across multiple sections of the descent suggested resistance, prolonged, involuntary, repeated. Partway down, a secondary passage branched off the main stairway, deliberately and completely packed with stone fill and compacted debris, forced inward from the exterior. Whatever this passage once connected, someone made certain it would never serve any purpose again. At the base of the steps, a massive stone slab sealed the chamber entrance. No gaps, no channels for air or light. Physical testing confirmed zero airflow penetration between the slab and the surrounding rock. Dr. Aaron Darby, an archaeologist from the University of Tennessee, stood in front of it for a long moment before he said anything. When he did, he was direct. The seal was overkill in every technical sense. That level of complete isolation, he said, is structurally unnecessary for any funerary purpose ever documented in this region. It is only necessary if the goal is absolute, permanent, irreversible containment. Now, you know what this structure was actually built for. Everything below that slab had been waiting in seal silence for over 2,000 years to tell you. What the dead revealed. The seal broke with a sound the team described as a slow exhale, as if the chamber had been holding its breath since the day it was closed. A rush of trapped air hit them immediately, heavy, stale, carrying the smell of ancient decay mixed with layers of old soot, and something sharp and chemical that burned the back of the throat. One team member stepped back involuntarily. Another covered her face. Dr. Kreeman held his position and waited for the dust to settle. The first chamber held a kind of terrible order. Skeletons laid out with deliberate care, bones aligned and visually undisturbed. But the details were wrong the moment you looked closely. Several remains were arranged face down, a positioning absent from every documented Nabatean burial custom. Others folded into postures that no funerary tradition in the region had ever employed. These positions didn't reflect ritual. They looked imposed, arranged by someone else after the fact, or forced into place while there was still resistance to overcome. Objects placed alongside the skeletons included nothing that would mark the deceased as individuals worth remembering. No jewelry, no personal effects, no markers of identity or social standing. Only small ceramic bowls spaced with deliberate exactness. One vessel was found pressed flush against a ribcage, as if held in place at the specific moment of death. Chemical testing of the chamber walls detected treated limestone associated in Nabatean material culture, specifically with containment structures, never with burial sites. Spatial groupings of objects on the floor match symbolic arrangements found in inscriptions describing restricted enclosures, spaces the ancient texts called houses of silence. And get this. Then the team opened the second chamber. The walls were black, not stained, black with layer upon layer of soot from repeated controlled burning conducted while the space remained completely sealed. The skeletons here were not arranged. They were piled, limbs tangled, skulls fractured, ribs broken. Dr. Sarah Khalil of the University of Jordan confirmed the damage to bone had occurred before death or during extreme confinement, not from settling over centuries. She looked at the composite analysis for a long time before she wrote her conclusion. This wasn't time. This was violence, sustained and close and deliberate. One detail stopped every person on the team. A child's skeleton pressed tightly against an adult's, arms positioned outward as if reaching. No one spoke for a moment. There was nothing ritual in the arrangement, nothing ceremonial. It reflected a final act. Someone in the last moments of their life choosing to hold on, knowing there was no way out and doing it anyway. Near the far wall, 3 skeletons were separated from the rest, positioned with clear intentionality. One showed markers of elevated social status. The 2 flanking it displayed severe trauma to the joints and spine. Ceramic jars nearby contained a thick, dark residue. Preliminary chemical testing identified iron-rich compounds mixed with ash and plant resin, substances linked historically to inducing sedation and physical compliance. Multiple skeletons throughout both chambers showed joint dislocations, consistent with prolonged binding at the wrists, ankles, and shoulders. And here's what was missing entirely. No inscriptions in either chamber, no names, no funerary texts, no acknowledgement anywhere on any surface that any of these people had ever existed. Dr. Aaron Darby of the University of Tennessee described the absence as intentional and complete. He didn't hedge it. This wasn't a tomb that failed, he said. It was a system that succeeded exactly as it was designed to. Erasure was the entire point. The truth about the stone. When architectural design, physical evidence, skeletal analysis, and the full historical record are placed side by side, one conclusion becomes unavoidable. Ancient Nabatean sources reference a category of restricted structure used to isolate individuals considered dangerous, contaminated, or politically unacceptable. People whose existence and whose memory afterward posed a threat significant enough to justify not just ending their lives, but eliminating any record that they had ever lived. The chambers beneath the Treasury match those descriptions in every measurable detail. The one-way stairway, the reinforced walls built to hold internal pressure, the sealed secondary passage, repeated burning in a permanently enclosed space, the restrained bodies, the deliberate, complete anonymity. Every element of what this structure was actually built for points in a single direction. The ornate facade, the image that has defined Petra in the imagination of the world for centuries, was never the purpose. It was the mask, designed to pull every eye upward toward beauty and grandeur so that no one would think to look down. The Treasury didn't invite the world in. It kept something permanently out of sight, out of memory, out of history, and that changes everything. But here's the deal. The families who lived closest to it never forgot. The Bedouin who passed their rules down through generations. Don't approach casually, don't let the children near it at sunset, don't sleep on the ground in front of it. They weren't trading in superstition. They were preserving something real, something specific, something the people who built this structure had worked very hard to destroy. The warnings were memory. And the memory survived because they kept it alive in the one form that couldn't be sealed underground. Think about what that child's arms reaching outward meant to the last person who saw it before the slab was lowered and locked. Someone sealed that chamber, knowing exactly what was inside. Someone carved the most spectacular facade in the ancient world directly above it and let the beauty do its work for 2,000 years. The warnings the Bedouin kept alive through every generation. Those weren't abstractions. They were the only surviving record of what the stone above was designed to bury. Every rule they passed down, don't let the children near it, don't linger, don't sleep on the ground in front of it, was a fragment of a truth that the Treasury's builders worked to erase. And it worked. Until 2024, it worked exactly as intended. The real purpose of Petra's most famous structure was never to honor anyone. It was to make certain that specific people, who they were, what they knew, why they were placed there, would be forgotten completely, not buried, erased. The Bedouin families kept the warning alive across centuries without knowing exactly what they were warning against. The stone kept the secret with mechanical precision. Together, they created a situation where the truth survived in two separate forms. One above ground in the memory of families who feared what they couldn't name. One below ground in a sealed chamber that archaeology spent 70 years being told not to open. There are more sealed chambers beneath Petra that haven't been opened yet. If this one held what it held, consider what the people who built it may have needed to hide more than once. If this changed how you see the ancient world, hit like and subscribe. There are more sealed chambers beneath Petra that haven't been opened yet. And what's inside them may be even harder to face than what we found here.